Hello, my name is Katie Mitchell, and I'm going to be talking about fan fiction, using students' love of television to improve language skills. I work at CU Boulder's International English Center, where I'm the reading and writing coordinator and an instructor. You might be wondering, what is fan fiction? Fan fiction is writing that continues, interrupts, reimagines stories and characters other people have already written about. So it's taking some of these classic stories and TV shows and putting our own spin on them, redoing their ending and putting them in a new location. And I'm going to be talking today about Sherlock Holmes fan fiction specifically because there's just so much that we can do with Sherlock Holmes. And fan fiction at its core is task-based language learning, built on problem solving and play. So it has this real power to be effective for language learning. First, it can increase receptive skills. Because the source material is used as inspiration for writing, fan fiction assignments motivate students to read and listen more closely. Fan fiction also encourages students to think critically because they need to make inferences about the characters' values, objectives, actions in order to place those characters in their own setting and storylines. The writing task also changes how students interact with the source material on such a basic level that it can really improve their receptive skills. We also can see how fan fiction can increase students' writing skills. It's so creative, and creative writing is playful and encourages students to experiment. This language play in and of itself can aid in language learning and fluency. In this playful genre, teachers can still focus students' attention on vocab and grammar, but it's inherently lower stakes, more creative, and less formal than other kinds of writing. Finally, fan fiction is meant to be shared, and having this audience makes a big difference. It's also fun. So together, this playfulness, practice, and motivation can encourage students' writing development in a real way. I'm going to share some sample writing with you later, and I promise you'll be impressed. So let's go through what this class looks like. The basic materials for this class are on the slide. And because almost all the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle stories, the Sherlock Holmes stories, are in the public domain, I adapted 3 of them to use in class. I chose these stories because they were, like I said, in the public domain, short, interesting, and they'd already been adapted for TV and movie. So there was something to pair with each of the readings, something we could watch. So these 3 stories, 2 narratives and 1 reader's theater, became the basic units for the class. We watched about 2 clips per story, so 6 total. And sometimes we would compare the stories and how they were modernized for TV or how things were changed. And after all that, we wrote fan fiction related to these 3 stories. So most of these activities scaffolded to that fan fiction writing. But I also put in some interesting games to encourage their interest in the topic. There's already so much made related to Sherlock Holmes that you just have so much you can do. There's already a board game that someone makes for Sherlock Holmes. So a lot is there that we can play with. I also warn students, and I will warn you that your students will want to spend all day, all class watching TV. And as I said, we watched TV clips. We did not watch whole episodes. And often we would be answering questions or looking for differences between the story and the TV show. And sometimes only one of the students would watch, and they would describe what was happening to their partner. There are so many activities in this Using Authentic Video in the Classroom book that I thoroughly recommend for how to just really take advantage of these small clips for this purpose. But I would also encourage students to watch the whole TV shows, as much TV as they want outside of class. And that's kind of the fun of this class. It can encourage students to spend hours watching TV, hours more exposure to English than they would have gotten otherwise. So that can be really powerful. But in my class, we're discussing our writing, we're role playing, we're solving riddles and playing games and making comics and watching short TV clips. And I'm just upfront with students about that. So I'm going to walk you through an example unit so you can see how the stories, the video clips, and the fan fiction all fit together. And this example unit is about the dying detective. So first, students read the story called The Adventure of the Dying Detective. There's an Oxford Bookworm version of it, so you could have your students get the Oxford Bookworm graded reader. I also have it up for free on my website, Your English Detective, which has most of the content I'm going to be talking about today. So since the stories are in the public domain, I have adapted them to sort of a B1 upper intermediate level and put this story up there so students can access it on the website. And they read that story, and I think it's about 12 pages. So for some students, it's really long for an elective class. And it's still interesting though. So I think we're going to do so much with it that there's still buy-in from students to actually read it, and they get sort of excited about it. And then we watched BBC's Sherlock. They've adapted this same story in season 4, episode 2. It's called The Lying Detective. And I'm going to show you a clip from it, and I want you to think about how the original 1913 story was changed when it became this TV show, The Lying Detective. Here we go.
You okay? What were you doing? He's in distress. I'm helping you. Restrain him now, do it. I was trying to help him. Sherlock, what was he doing to you?
Suffocating me, overdosing me.
Come on.
Saline.
Saline?
Yes, saline.
What do you mean saline?
Well, obviously, I got Nurse Cornish to switch the bags. She's a big fan, you know. Loves my book.
You're okay?
No, of course I'm not okay. Malnourished, double kidney failure, and frankly, I've been off my tits for weeks. What kind of a doctor are you? Oh, I got my confession there, didn't I?
Well, I don't recall making any confession. What would I be confessing to?
You can listen to it later.
Well, there is no confession to listen to. Oh, Mr. Holmes, I don't know if this is relevant, but we found 3 potential recording devices in the pockets of your coat. And all your possessions were searched. Sorry.
Must be something comforting about the number 3. People always give up after 3.
What? What is it? What? So, how does that open?
Screw the top.
Okay, so we can see here there's all this technology. They're in a hospital. In the original 1913 story, Watson is in the closet listening to this guy kind of make his confession about trying to kill Sherlock Holmes. I should also say here too that when students sign up for this class, I tell them that we're going to watch these TV shows, and I tell them the ratings on all the TV shows so they can make a choice about whether this is the right class for them, because some of the these TV shows are made for adults. So then after we've read the story, we've watched some of the TV shows, compared them, seen how they're different, then we put the character on trial. And we get to decide whether we're going to use the dying detective story or the lying detective TV show version. And hint, if you use the original 1913 story, Sherlock doesn't actually have a very strong case because it's just overheard, versus the lying detective TV show. Now they can record, and maybe the murderer gets to go to jail. So it's really kind of fun to see what happens. Students were assigned roles in groups. They wrote questions and testimonies. Some parts were improvised, but they really had fun with it. They really enjoyed playing Sherlock and playing this murderer and seeing if they could get a conviction. And then they wrote a fan fiction story where they had to imagine how Sherlock Holmes was actually going to die, since he doesn't die in either of these, the story or the TV show, in this version, in that story, in The Dying Detective. So they wrote a story of how Sherlock Holmes will die, and they used what they know of Sherlock. So this is kind of synthesis at its best. Now I'm going to show you one of my students' stories. He so kindly gave it to share. And he says, it starts with, "You guys are good friends. Sherlock is very appreciative of you. Why did you kill him?" a policeman asked. Watson gave a sneer and said, "All men are jealous. I often helped Sherlock solve many cases and helped him catch criminals. But he was famous, worshipped person, not me. Yes, I'm also famous, but far less than him. Over time, the jealousy grew stronger. And then a thought came to me," Watson explained. "When Sherlock died, I wanted to prove that I can be good myself. So I started pretending to be Sherlock, and I assisted the police with several big cases." This is just the beginning, but I love that Watson is the one who kills Sherlock in this. And I love how vivid it is. The student used this powerful language like sneer. I'm sure that came from one of the stories. And it's just so vivid. In other writing classes, students may have heard about cohesion, and here these ideas flow. And the student has even skillfully used paragraphing and put "Watson explained" at the end of the second paragraph to signal that the idea is ending. Other places in the story, the student used past perfect progressive and other complex grammar. So he was obviously integrating a lot of things that he'd learned in our program that went far beyond what I taught. But this writing became a place for him to experiment. And I love that. That's exactly what I'm aiming for. So I'm going to give you another example, and this is about the Irene Adler story. And for those of you who are big Sherlock Holmes fans, you will know there are so many versions of Irene Adler. Here are just 6, but she wasn't a big character in the original stories. But TVs and movies have loved to play up her role. So you could watch a fan summary of exactly what this original story is, but it's simply this. And that's what I mean about all the content, right? Like, there are fan stories, fan summary synopsises of all the stories. It's amazing. But the basic idea is that Sherlock is hired by this king to get a photograph back from Irene Adler. And it turns out Irene Adler is super smart. And he gets beat and he doesn't get the photograph back. And instead, Irene Adler runs away with this lawyer who she's in love with. And to Sherlock, she becomes the woman maybe that he's always wanted to be with. So it's kind of this love interest that he has. And she outsmarted him. So we read A Scandal in Bohemia, which is this story. And again, this is on the Your English Detective for free. So it's public domain story. And I've adapted it for upper intermediate students. And then we watched a Sherlock clip from A Scandal in Belgravia, which is their adaptation of that story. And then students wrote about the next meeting of Sherlock and Irene, because she ran away. She got away and Sherlock couldn't stop her. And so trying to imagine what would it be like when Sherlock finally sees the woman again, and where will they be and what will happen? So I'm going to read you another sample. And if we were in a real workshop, I normally hand out the sample now. But I want you to read the example and think about, how does it connect back to the reading, watching? So how does it connect back to that story that I've shortly explained? And what surprises you about this piece of writing? And how does this writing build skills needed for university? Because again, this is creative writing, but it really does build skills that students need for university. So try and think about those three things. And again, I have this very impressive sample from a student that I'm excited to share with you. So here we go. Sherlock knew that their paths would cross. The letter and the photos are not items you leave behind in a place you don't intend to return to. At least not for someone like Irene Adler. They are rather a promise to return. Their paths indeed crossed, but not in a way Sherlock had hoped. It wasn't over a cup of tea where they could exchange conversation, or better, solving crimes. Their meeting was unpleasant, at a crime scene. Adler's beloved husband, the lawyer, was murdered in their own house. Sherlock looked at her, shocked, saying nothing at all. He passed her, rushed towards the house, not giving her time to say a word on her behalf. He walked into the living room where the murder had occurred, and to his disbelief, every object in the house, every speck of dust, every drop of blood showed that Irene Adler, the woman, is the only suspect of the murder. Sherlock took a second look around the room before heading back to talk to her. "It wasn't you," Sherlock said, interrupting a police officer who's trying to question Miss Adler. "You are far too smart to commit such a flawed crime," he continued. "I'm going to ask you who killed your husband. Who's trying to silence you?" "I would say the king, but we both know it wasn't him. He has a reputation to keep, and it's far too dangerous for him to murder your husband," he whispered while leaning in. He paused for a few seconds, giving her some time to collect herself and answer his question. But her answer never came. Irritated by the lack of response, Sherlock leaned in further towards Irene, trying to create a safe space for her to talk, to get a name that might lead him to the real murderer. However, his questions were answered by sobs. Being the impatient person he is, he straightened his posture, preparing to walk away from the crime scene. He examined his surroundings and the number of eyes on him before taking Irene by the hand and leading her through the crowd of police officers. Little did he know that part was planned. After all, it was Irene Adler, the woman he was dealing with. How did Sherlock let his feelings for her cloud his judgment? Her pace slowed down till she stopped walking, while Sherlock was just a few steps ahead of her. He stopped and turned back, after he realized he was gripping nothingness instead of Irene's hand. "You haven't changed a bit, Sherlock," Irene said. "After all these years, I thought you would read the whole situation better." Sherlock, looking for a clue, tried to regain control of what's happening. She looked at him with a gentle smile. "I was never the lover you knew," she said softly, hoping he'd understand the crime better. "I was assigned to kill my husband," she admitted. She walked up to Sherlock, gave him a hug, and kissed him on the cheek, walking further away from the crime scene. She left Sherlock yet again defeated, this time without a letter or a photograph. This was her goodbye. So what do you think of this? If we go back to those questions, how does it connect back to the reading or the watching? And you can see all these little parts where the writer here has hinted at things that have happened before. The idea that she left these things for him before, the idea from earlier that it couldn't have been the king. I know you don't know the story, but explaining that it couldn't have been this other person, so he's confused. So it has all these little tiebacks to the original story. And when we think about the next question, what surprises you about this piece of writing? I think I'm most surprised by sort of the depth that the student was able to create. So we see phrases like every speck of dust and every drop of blood. The reader has really created a sense of feeling in the story. And the events, we know what's happening, we can follow them. I saw that in a lot of student stories. I think because they really wanted to share something interesting with their classmates and wanted to convey this cool story, we would spend a whole class period just reading stories to each other when they had their first draft, and students loved it. They loved to be able to share these creative things that they'd come up with. And I think to answer that third question, how does this writing build skills needed for university? I think you can see that too. It's a great forum to talk about clarity, about sentence level grammar. You can see that there's cohesion that the student's working on. And then there's also, in a way, this synthesizing of information from multiple sources that's all going into this one fun piece of writing. Other fan fiction ideas are sort of changing the medium and bending characters. And this little cartoon is one example of that. So taking a story and turning it into a comic strip, we did that with the stories too. You can also bend characters. This is when you change the ethnicity or gender of the character. And so in this case, Sherlock becomes this woman. So you can experiment with all sorts of fan fiction things. It doesn't just have to be these longer stories. All these things can be so powerful though, so interesting and engaging. So fan fiction has many forms. It can change the medium, you could make videos, you could make these comic strips, you can change the characters, you can create new endings, you can create new stories. And that's what's so fun about it. You can really do a lot in a class like this. And it's approachable because the students know the topic, they feel comfortable, and they really want to share. So next steps, I have a TESOL Connections article from a year ago, I think, that you can read about Sherlock Holmes and this fan fiction elective. You can go to my website, Your English Detective. It's just has the stories and some of the activities, and everything on there is free. You can also go to fanfiction.net. I'm just going to warn you to filter your search by K, which is for kids, because there's all kinds of fan fiction and it's not all appropriate. But there's so much for you to explore. And I hope that you'll take this time to really do that, to really explore all these avenues of fan fiction. Here are my references, and please reach out and email me to talk more about fan fiction. And if you use any of these materials, I'd love to hear how it went. Thanks so much. Have a great day.